Oh, I love that sound. That's wonderful. So between now and lunchtime, we thought we'd just have a kind of uncontroversial, easy subject, which is transportation and cities. Lots of interesting trends, things happening, lots of strong advocates for different solutions for how we're going to get about in the city. We've got 4 presenters offering a little vignette of thought, of idea, and then once again we'll try and have some conversation following on from that. So I'm going to start. Delighted to welcome back to the platform Associate Director of the MIT Sensible City Lab and CEO of Superpedestrian, maybe looking at the focus on mobility being about people at the heart of it. That should be what it's about, but sometimes maybe other things get in the way. Please welcome to the platform Assaf Biderman.
Thanks, Peter. Hi again, everybody. Now that the mayor is gone, can we change back the projection to show Cambridge? All right. So cities, they've been a locus for of attraction for many years. Actually, for millennia, people would congregate in them to exchange thoughts, to collaborate on ideas, to exchange genes, to exchange goods, to create new things. Now, cities have been so successful that we stretch them to unimaginable sizes. We all know what it's about. And the infrastructures that require to sustain that are vast. Transport infrastructure is one of the major one of them. And the question is today, can we start to think about a situation where we provide the same level of service we need to live in these great places, but start to use the infrastructure in a smarter way, start to minimize it? We've looked at a digital layer that's sort of embedding itself within the physical one. How can we use this maybe to redeem ourselves from that lump of concrete and steel that's supporting our life in cities, and maybe enable us to use this infrastructure in a smarter way? So it's a question that we've been asking, that many people have been asking around the world. And I'm going to touch on a couple of projects from the Sensible City Lab that exemplify this, and maybe end with a little hippie note. So starting with sharing, many of us are familiar with the situation. You're at the airport, there's a sea of taxis that are empty, and one by one, people get into them, driving to their final destination. Quite inefficient, right? Then you're in downtown trying to hail a cab, and there's nothing to pick you up, right? So this is a project started in 2012, where we took 150 million taxi rides, data about that. The yellow is pickups, the blue is drop-offs in New York, right? And we analyzed this information. We asked a very simple question. What happens if you allow people to start to share trips? Using the same vehicle, sharing a trip. Can we come up with a special algorithm that would make this as efficient as possible? Maybe allowing us to reduce a little bit the amount of infrastructure we need in that city to support mobility. So this is a paper that was published later in 2014 in the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science. And it proposed a mathematical solution where if you introduce just a little delta, up to 5 minutes, in which people wait for their taxi ride, leaving exactly from where they would have left if they rode alone, going exactly to where they would have gone if they rode alone, you can reduce the number of taxis in New York providing exactly the same service by 40%. But that's significant, right? So think about how much less pollution, think about how much less real estate is being used, think about how much safer the city becomes, think about how much extra capacity you can add if you need it, looking at prospective growth into the future. Now, if you combine this with self-driving cars, right, where we're very much moving towards having a car that can drive alone to pick up those trips and facilitate them, then you can really start to think about an environment where we're using 20% of the cars we have today, that's what analysis is showing, to provide the same mobility needs. So if you fix demand today, with those two things, you can remove 80% of cars or 80% of mobility infrastructure. Again, significant. Now let's look at something slightly lighter, bikes. There's a bicycle renaissance around the world. Most of us are seeing this. I think it crosses the planet north to south. This is an image from Guangzhou, where the largest bicycle sharing system in the world is under operation. They appear all around the world. But there's a problem. Again, the same thing we discussed earlier. Look at London, for example, and how it grew from the 16th century all the way to today. This is the city now. This is the city in the 30s. And this is the addition of motorized transport. It's hard a bit to see because of the contrast, sorry. So we looked at this and realized that actually distance is a big deal for cyclists, right? Beyond a certain number, that's in Copenhagen, 15 kilometers, people just don't cycle anymore. Hills are a big deal. That's not in Copenhagen. But hills are a big deal for cyclists as well, maybe psychologically, maybe physically. So what we decided to do to address this is we created a little robot that you can put on any bicycle, and it expands the reach of your body. This was initially developed at the Sensible City Lab with the mayor of Copenhagen, and then spun off into a startup called Superpedestrian. This thing has inside a motor, batteries, 12 sensors that detect the most minute things you do with your feet. It has batteries, and it has 3 little computers. When you pedal, this thing monitors really the most delicate motions you make, and it imitates you, making you 10 times stronger. You don't have to do anything. You just use it like a normal bike. You control it with your phone, so when you approach it, it unlocks automatically. And then you can change how much it assists you, collect information from the environment around you, share it with other people, learn about your physical bodily condition as you ride and after the fact. This is an example from a ride taken on the Copenhagen wheel. You see this person just pedals, and this is the app on the right, data accumulated down there on the map below that you can see later on the web. The sensation is quite remarkable. It's not like you're on a stripped-down moped. It's more like you took a legal performance enhancer. It really imitates you. So again, to that hippie note, how would a city look if we free up so much of this infrastructure, so much public space for other uses? Maybe the future city doesn't have flying vehicles all around. Maybe it's something a bit more like that. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I can testify to the fact that it's a life. You might want to take. You can see the slides if you sit down that way. That's perfect. Sure. Take a bike ride. There we are. I can testify to it. It is a life-enhancing experience. I thought I was a pathetic cyclist. A minute on that, and woof. So that's interesting. So, interesting thoughts there. Well, we're going to move further forward and go to the very mecca, the very heart of bicycle world, which is Copenhagen. Jens Martin Skibsted, who's chairman of the Danish Design Council, founder and creative director of Biomega, who's got some thoughts and challenges again on what is going on in terms of mobility, transportation in urban areas and where the future might lie. So, Jens, great to have you with us.
Okay, so I've always seen this kind of epic battle going on between bikes and cars, and I still see that going on, and I see the bikes as sure winners, but I see something also arising. I see there's another battle, not between the two-wheeler and the four-wheeler, but also the three-wheeler and three-wheeler and six-wheelers and four-wheelers. So we need to cut it down to very simple narratives because of this urban complexity. So as we will see today, just any bit influences another in a city. That's why I'm cutting it very, I'm kind of being super simple about it. So the very simple way to say it is the car won. Today, cars own all of the cities, despite of their functional disadvantages. I'm not going to go through them. But they win because they're sexy. We kind of think that sexiness is inherent to the car. But if you take two of the least sexy means of transport here in the US, the electric bike and the bus, actually you find examples where you can have then in a sexy version. But we don't have the complexity yet of the car industry. So the car industry is kind of obliterated function. So if I want a 4x4, it means the world if it's a Hummer or a Land Rover. So they've kind of like taken functionality almost out of the equation and made it all about lifestyle. So lifestyle is the key to changing things, and big format wars have been won by people that understand this. So the first Benz car looked like a horse carriage. The first kind of, or some of the first electric cars here look like combustion cars. There's nothing under the hood, but it doesn't matter that it's an anachronism because now it's about the change. Today, we have two main narratives as I see it. One is this kind of the sharing bikes, the counterculture movement, reinventing the economy, and then this disruptor from Silicon Valley, the driverless cars, and we kind of see these as the focal points. I don't see them being that important. Of course, the bike sharing systems can be great. The one out here on the street might work perfectly, but the one here in Abu Dhabi that actually makes you go between Ferrari World and the Formula One track in blazing heat might not be ideal. So what I see happening is not only will the bikes win, the bikes are actually taking some of the commodities that the cars have. So they want electric assist. They want to be able to transport your kids, your groceries, maybe even a roof over your head. So the bikes are kind of growing. The response from the car industry is just making cars electric, at least the first response. Electric cars are great in many respects, but they're still at huge disadvantage in the cities because you are still stuck in traffic. You still have to pay a fortune for it, and you're still spending way too much energy. So they've realized this, and they're shrinking the cars. And they're making them super small, super efficient, and actually these cars are starting to resemble the big bikes. So now we're having, that's what I meant by the three-wheelers against the three-wheelers. This is what the future is bringing to us. And it's not necessarily these driverless cars. How driverless cars go, we don't know yet. There are many different scenarios, but even by the best scenarios where they're shared, where you can't drive without passengers, it still doesn't cut the 600% extra space needed. So therefore, the car industry has sat down and thought about this. Some of these guys actually in the forum, the World Economic Forum, have thought about it, and what they came up with was actually what Assaf presented to you later. If we start having cars going back and forward between where you need to, from where you need to go, from where you are to where you need to go, then you'll get something that's very efficient. But actually the result they come up with is not the car, it's an enlarged car. What is an enlarged car? It's a bus. It's actually what you have all over Africa, the matatu. So what they have in Africa, well, in most major cities, is what they project, the car industry project will happen in the world. Of course, the matatus use human intelligence instead. And actually, that's what I can see happening around. So this is from Sion in Switzerland, and these driverless buses are driving around now. So it's not driverless cars, it's driverless buses. Let me see if I can move ahead. And so, of course, all of this smart city thing is a ubiquitous thing, so it also helps cycling. This system in Copenhagen makes sure that you don't get killed as a cyclist when a truck turns to the right. I don't see smart city as a disruptor, but as an evolutionary thing. These are not new problems. This picture here is from your city, from Boston, almost your city, and it's from 1920. So we've had 90 years to solve these problems, but we've seen them as technological problems, and they're sociological problems. So lifestyle is one of the things you need to win over the cities. Lifestyle is not a superfluous thing, it's about making sure you procreate. So procreating trumps just about anything except from your own personal survival. So these three-wheelers that I'm talking about don't necessarily look like the one I presented. They are the ones that enable personal freedom, and the bike versions are way cheaper. So most of them today are cargo bikes with some electric assist. And the other big thing is, well, six-wheeler, I call it that. It could also be a four-wheel bus. But anyway, cars, by getting smaller and bigger at the same time, are moving into the turfs of two other formidable adversaries, the mass transit guys and the bike guys. So that's where I see things going.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I feel we have much food for conversation coming on shortly, which will be further fueled by a contribution from Uber. So Andrew Salzberg, Global Mobility Policy Lead in Uber. Fascinating to hear what's going on there, what some of the trends are, and how that fits into the picture emerging or not emerging about the future of mobility. Andrew, great to have you with us.
Sure. Okay, so I'm starting with one biographical slide just because I studied urban planning and public transportation here at MIT and at Harvard, and after that I worked at the World Bank on public transport schemes across Asia, and I grew up on a bike. My dad is Dutch, he's wearing funny shoes in that photo. And I'm here to talk a bit about how Uber, where I work now, kind of helps to fit in to some of the same goals that public transport seeks to achieve. One of them is the idea of more riders in fewer cars, which Assaf was talking about in the paper from Sensible City Lab. And the other one is more recently kind of concretely working side by side with transit agencies. So the first one is moving more people in fewer cars. So we had the paper on the theory of how this could work in New York from Sensible. I think what's been interesting to watch over the last couple of years as we launched Uber Pool, which is our shared ride product, is to watch how it's been taken up across the world. So the basic idea here is you used to have two riders, each individually completing a trip. We saw there was a lot of overlap in those trips in our data as well as in the taxi data that was public. So we set out to make a product to allow those people to share a ride. So before I go into the results of what we've seen, it's good to emphasize this is a hard problem, right? People have tried to get people to share cars for a long time, starting with the oil crisis in the 70s in the US, but it's something people have wanted to do. It's an obvious solution to using road space more effectively, but it's hard. So the percentage of people commuting by carpool in the US has dropped by half in the last 30 years. So it's exciting to share today kind of the latest numbers on what's happening with Uber Pool. So we have 33 cities across the world that are using it. We have 11 cities that have more than 100,000 individual people who are sharing rides every single week. Since we launched, we have well over 100 million rides now, and 90 million miles just in 2016 have been taken off the road by virtue of the fact that people are now putting two people into one car, and so those miles are not happening. So that's exciting. And obviously what starts to happen when you use road space more efficiently is that in theory over time, you might need less of it, right? That's the exciting piece of what we're looking at. And so we're trying to move this idea further and further. So Pool is the first product. We have something called Uber Commute. And the idea here is to genuinely try and turn every single car on the road into a shared car. And the way you do that is by making it easier and easier to be someone who shares your car. So Uber Commute, you don't have to sign up to be a driver in any direction. When you sign up to work with us, you input your destination, and we're only giving you rides that are going the same way you're going. So if you're commuting from a suburb of Boston to downtown, we can put someone in your car, and that's it. So that could be a different caliber or a different kind of person or a different use case than someone who wants to drive 10, 15 hours a week and make some money with Uber. So that's something we're excited about, turning every single car into a shared car. And if you do that, obviously, you start to address some of the pretty wasteful uses of space that we have in the US. Parking is the most obvious one. There's plenty of reasons that we all agree parking is not an ideal use of urban space. But also you start to get to the idea of actual traffic lanes can be used more efficiently. And so this is a shot of the Prospect Park West bike lane near where I live in Brooklyn. For those of you who know it, it's probably like the most controversial bike lane in the country, or at least in New York. But if you look at it, it looks anything but controversial. There are still active lawsuits happening about this. So if we can help to contribute to a conversation where it's easier to use road space more efficiently, and that opens up use cases for things like this, so much the better for us and I think for cities overall. The second is Uber and transit. So in the last 6 months to a year, we've been in more concrete conversations with transit agencies across the US, public agencies, about how we might be able to work together to concretely achieve some of the same objectives. And so this is one of my favorite shots. When I first started at Uber, I work in New York. I made a map of where requests happen in the New York metro area. And even if I didn't know where the commuter rail lines were going, you could just draw them using a pen to kind of connect where the dots happen. Because people are sitting on the train and trying their best to request a car so that it arrives at the station when they're there. That's an interesting use case we didn't plan for. Metro North didn't plan for it. And it was kind of a hard thing to do. People were doing it anyway. So this is a map of trips happening to or from transit stations along Metro North in Connecticut. The other way this was happening kind of organically, this overlap between transit and Uber, is by time of day. So APTA, the American Public Transport Association, put out a report that really hit on this point specifically, where Uber is at its best late nights and on weekends, and transit tends to focus on peak hour commuting. So I think the nice message from that study was that Uber and transit together have more chance to get someone to leave their car at home or to forego car ownership altogether than either one of those systems does on their own. And so those were both just things that riders kind of figured out on their own. We had no promotion, no nothing. It was just a use case that was organic. But over the last 6 months, we've gotten the chance to do much more concrete work with transit agencies. So people from Caltrain to BART to MARTA to agencies across the country have come to us and kind of found different varieties of things to do with us. And one of those in Pinellas County, Florida, was to actually sponsor rides through Uber as an access mode for transit. So they are willing to chip in $3 for your ride if you drive or if you pick up a ride from a suburban area to a specific bus stop. So they're trying to find ways to like enhance the efficiency and attractiveness of transit by partnering with Uber. And the last use case I want to talk about is built on top of our API that's open to anybody. And so what's exciting here, this is City Mapper. They've had an app that's been built on the great work by transit agencies in the last half dozen years to open up their real-time data feeds. And so this is a use case from my cousin's house in suburban Connecticut to Grand Central Station. What it's showing you here is not just Uber or transit side by side, but actually a combination journey where you would take Uber from your door to the Stamford train station and then into Grand Central. And so this is, this doesn't require a formal collaboration between us and the railroad, right? This is us putting out an open data feed, transit agency putting out an open data feed, and a great third party kind of focusing on making that experience seamless. So this just launched like a few weeks ago. It's the first step, but I'm excited about the idea of our platforms being taken advantage of by, if you have a rail line in the suburbs, there's a floating car network out there. Maybe there's a third party who's willing to kind of connect those into one seamless journey. So excited where this can go. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So testing stuff, it's real time, so we're beginning to see what some of the implications of some of these innovations. Somebody who has to try and make sense of it all and try to do good policy decisions in the city is our final speaker in this little section before we open up a conversation. Kate Fichter, who's, or Fichter? Fichter, okay. Okay, I'll take a deep breath. You've got the longest title of anyone this morning. So, and this is coming out of your 5 minutes, 20 seconds. No, it isn't. Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination, Massachusetts Department of Transportation. So your job is to try and make sense of all this stuff and try and do something out there that kind of works for people. Yes. And you're mayor.
No.
No, not for the mayor. Okay, no. Well, best of luck. Okay.
And for the mayor.
Be fascinated to hear what your take on what's going on and maybe some of the questions that all these innovators need to be addressing.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. So I will come at this from the deeply practical perspective, which is that I am one of the people that helps to oversee the MBTA, our local public transit agency here in Eastern Massachusetts. Can I see a show of hands? How many people are regular MBTA riders? All right, not too bad. And I'm also going to start off by saying that I'm actually breaking 2 of the conference rules. The first is that I did not make slides, so everybody will have to look at me instead of at the screen. And the second is that I'm actually going to take issue with the first line on my agenda, which is a change is happening in transportation, focusing on greener, more comfortable, and more autonomous, efficient mobility solutions. I think that is true in some ways, and it is fascinating, and there's a lot that we can learn from it. But it's important to keep in mind that it is extremely limited to very small communities at this point, at least in the United States. And it is limited geographically, demographically, economically, by age, by gender, by mobility. And I think my job, and this is something I would encourage everybody in this room to think about, but for the public sector, we need to provide high volume, low cost public transportation solutions to as many people as possible in as many ways as possible. And that means that while we have a lot to learn, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, from the types of innovations that folks here are thinking about, it still has not really penetrated what we are doing. And we're starting up some partnerships with Uber and with Lyft, which is very exciting. But there still is a very long way to go in that. So I think for us at the T, anyone who lives locally or who follows public transportation knows that the MBTA is very challenged in a lot of ways, as are many large, what we call legacy public transit systems around the world. They're very kind of hulking, inflexible. They have very, very fixed costs, very expensive costs. They're not easy to operate. They're very much not nimble and not flexible. And that is exactly where the Ubers and the Lyfts and the Superpedestrians and the other sort of innovative, disruptive transportation technologies and ideas can help us. And I think there's a really important sort of synergistic relationship that can happen there, because all of the folks who are thinking about different ways to change urban and regional transportation, you want to be disruptive. You're looking at what's there now, you're saying there are problems here, it's not working, which I think everybody will agree with. But in order to really be disruptive and transformative, you need to reach the audiences that I serve, the really mass audiences, which means that what you are selling needs to be accessible to them, and accessible not just financially, but culturally, demographically, other kinds of ways. And at the same time that you guys want to be transformative, we want to be transformed. We know that we need to change. We're still running a mid-20th century or late 19th century business model. We need to be different, and we need to learn from you how we can partner well to do that. And the last thing that I would say, since I'm speaking to a room of planners and myself an MIT-educated planner, something that I think about a lot and I think is important for all of us to keep in the forefront of our minds. The work we are doing is work that changes the built environment, that looks to change how people can live, how they can get around. That's a very fundamental thing. It's a major responsibility. And we always need to remember that not everybody necessarily wants to live like we do. I don't own a car. I get everywhere on foot. I get everywhere on T. That's a big part of sort of my personal value system. But I know that part of my job, I serve the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. I serve the 6 million people who live in Massachusetts. They don't all want to live that way. So we need to find a balance that makes it possible for different types of transportation solutions to coexist happily. It's not about the bikes necessarily pushing out the cars or the bikes pushing out the buses. You see a lot of talk of rivalry and fights over how to share a lane width. This is really about figuring out how to do it together. And I get to end early. I know we have the unenviable position before lunch, so we shouldn't keep everybody too long.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So once again, I think we've got the raw materials for a very interesting conversation about that journey forward of how cities function in terms of, for everybody, in terms of their transportation mobility. Amazing innovations taking place, but how does that mesh with the reality of seeing working, livable, transformed cities? So that's our challenge. Have a quick conversation. What grabbed you from what you heard from the 4 presentations? And then again, I'd love to be driven by not driven, I'd love to cycle gently with your thoughts and ideas in the conversation. So just have 2 or 3 minutes. What's grabbing you? What's the killer question you want to ask to these people? All right. So, right, I want you to inform this agenda, because there's all sorts of different things we could talk about, but I'm going to come straight to yourselves. Who would like to offer me a first point, question, challenge, or something? There we are, lady towards the front. I'm sorry the lectern's in the way, but we'll all look around the corner. Okay.
Hi, I'm Kathy Wissink. I'm with Microsoft New England. And Katherine, I thought you had a really good point in terms of innovation has to address the masses. And this is a question, I think, for all of you. How does private sector strike the balance between innovation and making sure it provides support at scale?
Okay, I'm going to come down the line. So,
me first?
Why not?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard question. It's a good question to raise. I think for us, the history of our company for the last 4 or 5 years has been the product getting more and more accessible to more and more people, right? The price point has gone down. Things like Uber Pool provide, half off the fare in Boston that's already kind of probably half a taxi fare to begin with. And so what we're seeing is that there's more and more pickup from people who didn't want to use a product at 2 times the cost of a taxi, but can make it part of their weekly or monthly routine when they need it to use something that costs half of what a taxi costs. It doesn't solve all the problems, but I think the kind of trend line for us has been lower and lower price points that bring more and more people into the market space for us to be able to address. And I think what's also interesting on the availability side, I don't have slides here for it, but if you see, I live in Brooklyn, right? Something like, I think 2% of taxi trips, yellow taxi trips in New York start in Brooklyn. We have 35% of our trips in the city start in the outer boroughs. You can make the same point about Roxbury and Dorchester. The wait times for Uber there are much more similar to downtown Boston than the equivalent is for taxi. So I think we're seeing service be available in a much wider swath of the US, also in suburbs and smaller towns. where you didn't have on-demand transport options before.
And are you seeing, Uber as a major corporate, are you seeing an evolution in your style of thinking and engaging? Because you obviously need to, you had a, you wanted to get a thing that worked.
Yeah.
And that's not been universally popular, but popular in many areas and all the rest of it. And I'm just wondering whether you're now seeing that you need to be actually part of a set of thoughtful conversations, or is it that little bit that you do there, but basically the rest of it is just
No, I think as we've grown,
job.
it's that. I mean, as we've grown in scale now, I think
Right.
it's a more interesting time to have conversations with agencies that have been looking at these problems for a long time. For me personally, it's been interesting to come from urban planning, public transport, and look at Uber in that context. I think as we've gotten larger now, it's meaningful to have conversations about what the impact is on broader urban transportation systems.
Okay. Kate, I wonder your experience, in a sense, working with corporates, with the private sector, and how that's working in terms of them providing thoughtful solutions that are working for all.
So I think, at least, I can speak primarily to the Boston experience, but I think this is fairly representative of public transit across the United States anyway. So sort of since the end of the Second World War period, public transportation in the US has been wholly public, and there has been sort of a conflict between the rules that are set up to govern public transportation around keeping fares low and protecting employees and the private sector, and they've been kept very separate. But I think you're beginning to see that changing, in part because the public sector is increasingly finding the limitations of what it can actually do, and because the private sector is suddenly generating all these new transportation solutions, which had not necessarily been true in the past. And we've actually just had an interesting experience with this here. Anyone who reads the Globe or rides the T may know that we recently made the painful decision to have to cancel the second pilot effort to offer late night MBTA service in Boston. And part of the thinking behind doing that was this is something that T is not able to do well, again, because the T has these sort of gigantic fixed costs. It's not a system you can easily turn on and off for a couple of hours here and there. But perhaps this is a space where the Ubers, where the Lyfts, where the bridges, really be able to fill it in either on an ad hoc basis or actually through a contract with the state. Now, there are a million questions that poses, probably the most important being how do you regulate fares in a way that continue to make it accessible broadly. But I am certainly seeing a new openness to working with the private sector to try to fill in the places where public transit just can't be nimble enough to kind of fill every need.
And you find there's an increasing openness to thoughtful conversations around that?
I think there is. I think, if you had representatives of the MBTA union sitting here, they would probably say something very different. But I do think that the conversation is changing, and there is an increasing recognition that there's sort of the core services that the T offers today. Those are kind of sacrosanct. But if you're looking to offer different things or new things, there may be more flexibility.
Okay. Do either of you want to just offer a thought about this, very much about this kind of private sector and the corporates with their innovations, in a sense, becoming a servant of a common good?
I can briefly. I don't know if I'm spot on, but well, okay. So I come from Copenhagen, where we don't necessarily have this problem. Like private-public partnerships are very normal. So I don't see it as a huge challenge in general in all parts of the world. I do see this thing that there is a little bit from the public side, the story about, well, we have to address everybody. There are also a lot of poor people around that we need to cater to. It can sometimes be constructed in a way that, okay, poor people don't really care about their lifestyle. They're just about bare necessity. And we've got to, reach that level. I can tell you, bare necessity is very, very low. Like, of course, if you can't afford to get your children to hospital and get them to school, etc., then you're talking bare necessity. But bare necessity starts at a different point than most people think. So, to even the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. Your lifestyle is extremely important. So with the Biomega bikes, I started making extremely expensive bikes because you gotta aspire to something. And another example of this is I read an article in the New York Times about the Moscow Philharmonic driving around in the US with buses. And I was like, what is the point of this article? And at some point I realized that it was because if you drive in a bus, you have to be dirt poor. Look, this great Philharmonic from Moscow, one of the world's best, they drive in bus. How ridiculous. That was the point. And so you gotta treat also buses with that respect. That you want to communicate who you are and you want to be someone, regardless of what means of transport you use. And I think the route master in London is an example of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Asst, do you want to just?
Sure. Maybe just to your point about the need to reach farther out and deeper in the community across socioeconomic levels. I think it's becoming clear that, let's take, for example, this discussion that's happening everywhere now, and it's about what happens when the Ubers and the Lyfts go self-driving, right? Is this good for the greater good, for the people in the periphery? There's clearly a point, right, where urban density goes low enough, right, that these things don't make either economic sense or environmental sense, right? Where you move around empty as much distance to pick up another person or to pick up your first ride as you would to take, for example, one person and back to pick up another person, right? It's simple geometry. And so it's very clear that we're not going to look at one solution. We're going to look at people who are in their homes needing to get to something that's more of a public transport, especially if they're in the periphery, especially given what we're seeing now with the suburbs, where more affluent people are moving back into cities, and poorer people are being pushed out into the suburbs. So there is a demographic shift in the outskirts. People are going to need to combine a mode that is maybe privately owned, something nimble that would get them to the public transport trunk, and then to somehow spread themselves out, maybe with car sharing, maybe with autonomous cars in our cities. But I think there's a more important point about accessibility, which is, I'll take, for example, the bike project, right? It disrupts the price to the point where, price-wise, it's almost as cheap as anything you can do, putting one of those wheels on your bike. It's a third of the price of an electric bike, and it outperforms everything. So price, from an accessibility perspective, is then out of the equation. But I don't think that's the hindering factor. It's more along the lines of what you mentioned. The accessibility is driven by emotions. You call it lifestyle, I would call it emotions. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that it's not just about horsepower, about utility, about fulfilling the demand, but creating a sense of independence. Something needs to be sexy. It needs to be fun. It needs to bring a smile to your face when you get on it. And I think if we focus a bit more on that, we'll get far greater adoption than we believe.
Okay, I'm just going to have a quick comment from someone's tweeted in saying, great conversation about transportation, but what about no wheels? What about making spaces great for walking? Can't make an awful lot of money, shed load of money out of that. Well, maybe you'll have a thought about it. But just interesting in this, we are all different modes of transport and the tyranny of the bicycle versus the pedestrian in Copenhagen. It's amazing I'm still alive. I go to Copenhagen quite a lot, and I tell you, you need to be awake there. I'm just wondering whether, and maybe an initial thing from you, Kate, there is a danger that there's a kind of, we need a gizmo, we need a machine, we need a sensor, we need a something. Maybe we just need to walk. I don't know, is that...
Yeah, I walk everywhere, so yes, I totally agree. What we see in the data is that most Americans, and again, Americans don't walk as much as other countries, most Americans will walk about a quarter of a mile to get where they need to get to.
Right.
So then you come right back to the question of land use. Are the things where people need them to be within a quarter of a mile so they can get where they need to go, either services, work, or what we think about public transit. So yes, I think it's terrific that people walk. I think there's a lot we can do to make sidewalks better, make spaces better for people to walk in. Boston's blessed that we have pretty good setups. We also need to be realistic about how far people are willing to go on foot.
Okay, but they might walk a little bit further if we made it easier and more pleasant for them.
Yes.
Jens, do you want to offer a...
Yeah, so of course I agree with what you said during your speech, that the multimodal is the answer to all cities. But multimodal is different in each city. Therefore, it says very little when you say multimodal. But one thing that's common through all cities is you need walkability. You need the first half mile, the last half mile. You need
quarter mile.
Or quarter mile to walk that. And it's a problem because also if you then implement public transport and you don't have that walkability, then it actually doesn't make a difference. And it's specific for almost, many of the developing countries, and it's also very specific for the US.
Right.
But I totally agree, walkability is super important. It's not very efficient compared to cycling.
Efficient in terms of what?
In terms of energy expenditure. So you expend roughly double as much when you walk than when you cycle.
Okay, so you might get healthy. So there's
exactly.
There are health implications of walking. Be careful. Just wonder, Uber walk? Come on, you heard it first from this platform. You say walk, 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 and if you can't walk, okay, use one of our vehicles. How about that as a strategy? You need me on the team.
It's a great product idea.
Oh, you'd be surprised. We'll love you then.
I think what we've seen in real terms, like the individual trip, right? We may not make money when you walk. That's very true.
Right.
But what we're seeing is the people who use Uber are also the kind of people who bike and the kind of people who live in denser cities, right? We've taken off in places like San Francisco and New York and Chicago, and now we're getting out and further in the suburbs. But there's a great article from 538, and the title is, Uber should be transit's best friend.
Okay.
Because the chance of being more competitive than driving everywhere, which really I think is the shared kind of goal of getting people out of that mode of living, transit, walking, Uber together is a much more compelling option than the one. So
interesting.
I think they're correlated with each other.
Lady in the centre there.
We've been talking a lot.
You are?
Gillian Crampton Smith. I'm English, but I live in Venice, so with a different kind of transport system. But
I love the accent.
we've been talking very much about thinking about the citizen and how they get to work and how they get around the city. But in some cities, tourists are a huge number of people. And in London, they got worried because the underground transport was getting overcrowded. So they put information totems by the station saying, well, you can walk here in 6 minutes. And so people could see that if they were going 1 or 2 stops, it was probably quicker to walk. But because they didn't know, they would go down the tube because it was safe and easy. They knew they would get to where they wanted to go. So information is part, I think, of what people need.
Thanks very much. Does anyone just want to it goes without saying, but maybe part of what you're doing is offering
I think,
choice and information.
I think things like Citymapper and third-party apps like Transloc and other companies are really doing a great job of letting you compare options in real time, whether it's combinations of modes or individual modes. And I think if you could feedback in, if the tube had a feed of crowding levels that got fed back into the app and said, hey, you could take it, but it's going to be a squeeze, or you could walk. I think that's where things are going. And I think you're right. It helps to allocate people into the right mode all the time.
Okay. Question here.
Alice Charles, World Economic Forum. So given that we're in the year of Habitat 3, and we know that 3/5 of the global population will live in Asia by 2050, 1/5 in Africa, how are we going to provide affordable transportation for people in the global south? And I'll give you an example of the problems those people are facing. So I was in India last week, and I was speaking to the driver from the hotel, and he told me that he travels 2.5 hours every single day to work. He works a 12-hour shift. He needs to be there half an hour before work starts. So how can we provide affordable transportation for people like him living in Mumbai and the other cities around the world like Lagos, Mexico, etc.?
Thank you. I'll just give you 30 seconds to...
Great. I mean, I'll jump in quick. Clearly, nobody really has an answer to this, but it starts from planning. They have the advantage of really not making some of the mistakes we've made here. And really, I mean, it's been discussed earlier to think about getting the work closer to people, getting the people closer to where they work and where they spend time with their loved ones. It's key. It's beginning to happen. It's hard to do in retrospect because the city has so much inertia. It really takes a long time to change once you make up your mind about it. The other thing is that there are some shared. There's a lot of shared resource out of need in developing economies, right? You're seeing, very often you're seeing a city killing its gypsy cab business only to have regulated taxi, only to kill that later with an Uber and Lyft kind of thing. Maybe that's another privilege they have, is not to kill it in the first place. And then we're seeing also, very nimble modes of transport that are being introduced that can be produced locally. And so if you think about sort of the combination of all these things, so electric bikes to smaller vehicles, smaller than cars, maybe larger than bikes, that are much better environmentally, can be produced locally, that are rather affordable. Probably a combination of those will do it, but it's going to take time.
Okay. Do you have an experience with Uber? I mean, the big challenge. How can you be a contribution?
I mean, I think that the answer is there's no one answer, right? There's many different things, but we are active in a lot of the places that you're talking about. Right? We launched Uber Pool in Delhi, right, as part of their kind of broader scheme to handle congestion and the kind of pretty dramatic air pollution that they were having there. So I think, to the extent that you have cars on the road and they're using infrastructure as it is, if we can do things to make that as humanly efficient as possible by moving as many people per car as possible, maybe we can get the price point down, make that more attractive, and get away perhaps from the lifestyle choice that people are emulating, kind of the US model of I have to own a car. Maybe we can leapfrog the idea that everyone has to own a car and get to the idea of, I can use a car when I need it. I can jump in the back seat of someone else's car because that's efficient. And so I think there are roles where we can play in cities kind of all across the world. We're very active in China, and many of the cities are obviously growing there kind of faster than anywhere in the world. So Uber Pool has been a huge part of our growth line there.
But I'm just interested whether the limit of your engagement is, this is a model we've got, it kind of works, it's cheaper for the customer, all the rest of it, that's it, or whether you're beginning to be actually part of the conversation about how does a city function, of which you might have a product or a service, but somebody needs to take responsibility for being part of a quite complex conversation as opposed to just flogging our bit.
Yeah.
And I just wonder just where that, because we need bright minds on these grand challenges.
Yes, well, that's why I'm here, right? I think it's exciting for me, coming from an urban planning background and thinking about these things. Yes, I think that's what the last slide I had with the public transit agencies that are coming to us. They have, these transportation challenges are not new, right? They've been around for at least since the Second World War, if not before. And so, if there's a conversation about a problem, we have a set of tools. Can we use them to hit on the topic that you're of interest? So I think being part of the conversation is what we're trying to do more of, I think, than we did in the past.
Okay. James, do you want to offer?
Well, I can...
The developing south is slightly different from Copenhagen.
Yeah, it's very different.
Christiania.
Christiania might be developing. No, but I know, for instance, just Uber have some experiments in Nairobi where they're, for instance, seeing if there are different payment schemes and so on, so you can kind of come into this market where you already have a lot of sharing vehicles. So I know that Uber is actually engaging in this. Yeah. But again, bicycles are important, and walkability are important. One of the big challenges with bikes, some of these places, is actually that you're perceived as a loser if you have a bike. So a lot of people that could benefit from a bike, they know that if they take the bike, then it will show the world they can't even afford a scooter. So there are also some,
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think just quickly, I have a theory, which only time will tell if it's correct or not, but I have a theory that we are coming to the end of the great era of subway and rail building for public transit. China is obviously exception to this, but I think this applies both to the US and to the developing world. And one alternative, and I was lucky to go to Mexico City in the fall with some other folks who were here, I think really sophisticated bus rapid transit systems provide a much cheaper, basically comparable in terms of transport option that I think will be much more attractive to growing cities. What they will require right from the get-go is an aggressive and sustained pushback against private cars. But if you take that lane space for buses and you hold it, you create that norm. And you really can offer very good transportation service to huge groups of people at a fraction of the cost of what it takes you to dig up your city and build a fixed route subway. So that's, to the extent that I have any crystal ball, that's where I see some of these emerging cities growing.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but I've got time for one at the back there. Is it a quick one? Can it become a quick one? Pretty long. Okay. I'll take the first 6 words of it, okay?
Hi, I'm Pablo. I work at RGA New York as an experience designer, and I think in experiences for people, right? And that's something that we often forget, and I kind of missed a little bit so far. Cities are for people. And right. Technologies are great, and we embrace the technologies, and we love the technologies that we talked about, but we missed that point about people. Yesterday, I got an Uber pool, and my experience in the Uber pool sucked. So my point...
We can all share our stories.
We were getting on so well, weren't we?
It's not a critic. What I'm talking about is about, we think in technologies, right. but we think less in the content in those right. technologies, how we make transportation sexy, how we make it fun. Beyond the app and the service, the service is great, but like the experience, the content wasn't great. So I don't know if you guys have a point of view on that.
Can I take that one? I have so much to say about that.
Okay.
Okay.
1 minute, 30 seconds.
1 minute, 30 seconds.
Now.
Okay,
yeah.
so this is something that public transit systems in the US are just starting to think about. And it's a major pivot, which sounds really weird because, of course, we are in some ways in the customer service business, but we have not thought of ourselves that way historically. And I think there are some folks who operate rail systems who, if you gave them a couple glasses of wine and got them really honest, they would say that the passengers are sort of a nuisance because the passengers are what slow the system down, and because it takes them so long to get on the trains, they can't meet their schedules. So we have to orient ourselves to really thinking that we are in the service business. But we're not set up for that. And we're not, right now, we have 2 rush hours every day, no matter what, and we got to meet those rush hours, and that's a huge challenge. So thinking about the experience on top of that is something that we're just starting to do. But we see data as a very important piece of that. We see good customer information, somebody mentioned that, as being really important. Comfort, convenience, cleanliness, safety. These are all things that we are starting to focus on. But it's new, and it's going to take some time.
And just to comment on the pool story, I think there are...
First here, and then I'll come to you later. Yeah.
I'll do quick. I think there are, pool is a growing product. Sometimes there's things you're aroused not ideal. Okay. You meet someone who's not great. But I think generally what's been exciting about that is, there are now 11 cities around the world where 100,000 people are sharing their ride every week. And a lot of those are great experiences. We have weddings that come out of it. We have business partnerships. I've met a lot of great people in New York who are strangers who get in a car with me, which I think is an exciting part of making the experience a little more human of moving people together, which obviously is something public transport does better than anybody, to the extent that those are good experiences. Yes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Right. So I think that is, right. I think the pool is a little more of a human element of meeting new people.
Okay, Assaf.
I tend to disagree with the premise of the question in the first place, because if we look at the technologies that really survived and made it into cities, they're technologies that promote really the life in them. A subway, as good or as bad as it may be, right? It's incredible what it does to a place. Shared resources, right? Whether they're shared cars, shared larger infrastructures like the subway and the bus systems, shared smaller things like bikes and whatever else we'll invent in the future, are really geared toward the experience of the place itself, the stuff we do, meeting each other, going somewhere. And that's what you've seen being introduced to cities all throughout the past century. So I tend to disagree that we're thinking about the technology and not about the experience. What survives is what promotes the experience. And that's the stuff we should really be focusing on. In that sense, I agree.
And one thing that I see that worries me is that if we see a future with a real bifurcation, where they're the transportation haves who have access to technology and education and money, and can use their Copenhagen wheels and use Uber and never have to use public transit, the only folks who are going to be left on public transit are the people with no other mobility options, which both weakens the political power of public transit and I think really frays at the civic fabric of cities. Right. So I do, again, it's really important that these things work together rather than going down separate tracks.
That sounds a great place to stop in order to stimulate an over-lunch conversation. Oh. We will form an orderly queue about our varied experiences with you, Andrew, so that will be fine. But on your behalf, could I thank our panelists for a very stimulating session. Thank you very much.